So today we're gonna wrap up in terms of talk about teams that missed the playoffs this season in the moving forward series. And that last team we're gonna talk about is DC United. And a couple of episodes ago when I talked about Montreal and how they were so unlucky to not make it to the playoffs, and that if there's one team that probably deserved to make it to the playoffs, it's Montreal. Well, DC would like to have a word with that because there was no doubt that DC United did everything that they could on decision day to get into the playoff. Heck, they got the win against TFC, which was their bare minimum, and even got help from Orlando City beating Montreal and eliminating a team that they were fighting for that last spot in the playoffs. But unfortunately, with the Red Bulls getting that 1-1 draw against Nashville SC, which, into that decision day, that was all the Red Bulls needed to maintain themselves above the red line. And yeah, that of course happened, and DC missed out on the playoff by just a single point. But despite that disappointment, it was still considered a relatively successful season for Hernan Lasada, man, who finished the season with a 14-5-15 record and finished with 47 points. They scored 56 goals this season, give up 54 goals with a goal differential of +2. Top goal scored Ola Kamara. I mean, you talk about heartbreak. I mean, and talk about someone that tried everything on decision day to win the Golden Boot. Kamara did exactly that. Like, he was definitely chasing to try to get that Golden Boot away from Tati Castellanos, and there was at one point that he was actually leading the Golden Boot race, but unfortunately Tati Castellanos scored a goal on the final day, and he basically snatched that Golden Boot trophy away from Ola Kamara, or at least a share of that. But nevertheless, he did finish as the second highest goal scorer with 19 goals, followed by Paul Arriola with 6 goals, Jordi Reyna with 4 goals, Nigel Roberto with 4 goals, and Roma Abela with 3 goals. Top assist leader, Julian Gressel, definitely had a bounce back year this season. It started to look like the Julian Gressel we saw from his time with Atlanta United. Leads the team with 13 assists, followed by Edison Flores with 5 assists, Ola Kamara with 5 assists, Paul Arriola with 4 assists, and Felipe with 3 assists to round out the top 5 for DC United. So what went right for this DC team? Well, there was no doubt that, I talked about Ola Kamara with an incredible season this year. He definitely turned back the clock. Like, he looked like the Ola Kamara that we saw during his day with the Columbus Crew and the LA Galaxy. That was a goal-scoring machine. And, when DC bought him a couple of years ago, they were hoping that they can get that form. And at least in the first couple of years, he was not that kind of player. And you kind of also saw that he was starting to get up to his age and was fading fast in his career. Well, this last year, he definitely prove us all wrong with him scoring 19 goals, and I think this is the most that he scored in a season, because I don't remember he actually scored that many goals during his time with the Galaxy or with the Columbus Crew in a single season. Now, granted, a lot of those goals were penalty kick goals, and if you eliminate the penalty kick goals, then Kamara didn't really score as much as it is. But at the end of the day, a goal is a goal, and as I said, it's been an incredible season for Ola Kamara, and certainly a year that DC fans are hoping that this is not just him just kind of turning back the clock for 1 year, and then next year he's gonna go back to a player that is on a steady decline. Speaking of rebound year, Julian Gressel, as I mentioned, a guy that I think was probably one of the most disappointing signing last season, with him just, I mean, it was shocking to see how much Gressel regressed with DC, with the way that when he signed with DC, I thought that was probably one of the best signing in the league, and was a huge mistake on Atlanta part decide to let him go. But at least in the 2020 season, that's just not been the case. Like, Gressel, I just don't know what happened to him, with him just kind of completely regress. I mean, I guess a lot of that has to do with the fact that pretty much a lot of the players for this DC team was regressing, and it doesn't help the fact that when you're being coached by Ben Olsen and a guy that is very restrictive in terms of the attacking approach, then yeah, that can of course be a bit of an issue. And not to mention, Julian Gressel was pretty much playing out of position almost every single time under Ben Olsen, and was also playing many position. Yeah, that's also understandable why he wasn't really having a great year. But nevertheless, what a bounce back year he had under Lasada with 13 assists. And then speaking of Lasada, I mentioned in the Montreal video, if Hernan Lasada actually guided this team to the playoffs, there was no doubt he was going to consider as coach of the year. And again, if you subtract the potential that Bruce Arena was going to win the award, because everybody knew that he was going to win the award. But if you minus him, that there's definitely that big conversation of who actually could win it between Robin Fraser, Hernan Lasada, and Wilfred Nancy. And again, I think the only reason why Hernan Lasada weren't really factored in that Coach of the Year candidacy was kind of the same reason as Wilfred Nancy. They didn't guide their team into the playoffs. So what went wrong for this DC United team? Well, with Lasada, as I mentioned, with the way, well, actually I forgot to mention how he turned this team from becoming one of the most boring team in MLS to being the most entertaining team in MLS. Well, here's the problem that went wrong for Lasada. Yeah, that approach where he likes to kind of do high pressure no matter what, and just trying to go all out on the attack. It might be entertaining to watch for neutral, but it's also mean it can be very boom and bust. And what that means is that, with the high energy and the high pressure that Lasada like to use with his team, that means he is also exposing himself very, very well at the back, and that if DC would have trouble in terms of winning the ball high up the pitch, or if teams decide to play direct and over the initial press, then that's when DC could be in big trouble, because they leave so much gap at the back. And we've seen at times when teams are able to do that, that's when Lasada ball turns into a bust. But it can turn into a boom when teams can't able to get get past that initial DC press, and this is when DC just kind of dominate the game and just play such an entertaining brand of soccer. And then, of course, as I mentioned, with Lasada ball being very boom and bust, that also means inconsistent form. I mean, there was definitely some inconsistency, though I will say that during the summer month, they were at least consistent in terms of the way that was when Lasada ball really started to kick into the best we have seen in that teams, which just having no answer in terms of doing that. But nevertheless, during the latter part of the season, you can start to see some inconsistent form. Well, I wouldn't say just the latter of the season, but really during the month of August and September, you can start to see teams are starting to figure Lasada ball out, and this is when DC kind of started to have that inconsistency and suffer a lot of these high scoring game where there are some high scoring game that they win, but there also are some high scoring game where they just lose because of the way that they just expose themselves and just play this attacking brand of soccer nonstop for 90 minutes without even thinking about maybe dropping back and dropping down the intensity. And then the last thing went wrong for this team, and despite the inconsistent form that they had, especially down the stretch, the one of the big reason I think maybe DC did not make it to the playoffs is they got off to a slow start. And I talk about many times before, when you get off to a slow start to season, it is always incredibly tough to trying to recover, and that there's always that good old saying that you can't win MLS Cup in the first week of the MLS regular season, but you certainly could lose it. And in this case, they kind of had to dig themselves out a deep hole, and kind of was a way where when you're behind the eight ball like that for a very long time, it's going to be hard to dig themselves out. And they eventually did dig themselves out, but it took a while, and that they also were leaving with no margin for the error for the rest of the year. They want to sustain to be a team that is above the red line, which they weren't able to do so. And also the slow start, wasn't just because of the fact that the team was still kind of learning how to play Hernan Lasada and his high intensity form, but it's also because of the injury crisis. Like, they had a ton of play here that was out for injury. There was at one point in the season where they had like almost their entire starting 11 out because of injury, and they kind of also still had some injury crisis throughout the season, but the beginning of the season was tough because of the way that they were just missing so many guys in that team, and it was unsurprising when you have a team that's missing a lot of players, and also they don't really have a lot of depth. It just shows you how they just could not cope with any most of the team during the early part of the season. So moving forward for this DC United team, obviously, I think under the crop of players that Hernan Lasada has, it's kind of a miracle, the fact that he's able to get this type of team to play this entertaining brand of soccer, because people forget that when you look at this team, it's still a team that was kind of built under Ben Olsen, and that it's quite remarkable the fact that Lasada could turn into a very Bent Olsen kind of team and turn a team that has a lot of board players that are being very negative on the attack and turn them into an incredible attacking kind of team. Though that being said, there's no doubt that when you also look at the attack, besides Kamara having a career year, there wasn't really a lot of player that had a decent year too. I mean, I thought Paul Arriola this year was kind of a bit of a down year for him, but also because he is coming back from injury, so I'll give him a pass on that. But other than that, when you look at the goal scoring form, there's not a lot of player that is able to hit past 5 goals. In fact, only Arriola and Kamara are the only DC United player that actually scored more than 5 goals this season. So there's no doubt that I think this off season, Lasada is definitely going to try to add more onto the attack. But the question is he going to get the backing from the front office? Because one thing about this DC United front office, it's notorious in terms of not really spending too much money. I mean, I know they have signed some big name players before, but we have seen before where they tend to be cheap in terms of some of the signings, and we'll see whether or not the front office will give the money to Lasada to try to build the teams that he wants. And then of course the other thing that moving forward, well, one of the thing that if Lasada is going to improve his squad and maybe sign a designated player, they probably need to clear out one of their DP slot. And one of the DP slot that definitely they need to clear out of is the DP slot that is currently owned by Edison Flores. And this is definitely something that I think they're going to address this off season with the way that what they're going to do with Edison Flores. He has been a huge boss ever since he joined this team, and that I know a couple of years I said that he was going to be a great player because of how well he's done in Liga MX, and unfortunately when he comes to MLS, it feels like he was just one of those players that, while they did well down in Mexico, when he comes up to the US and plays MLS, it just never kind of fits his style. And it's also not to mention the fact that he has just suffered so many injuries in these 2 years that he's been with this team, and it just gets to a point where there's still some potential that Flores could be a decent player, but how much are you going to bet on that, the fact that he might get injured again, with the way that again he spent so many time on the IR table and not really a lot of time actually on the playing field. And if they do cut ties with him, they're gonna have to buy out his contract, because his contract, I think, isn't going to end until 2024, unless if some teams are looking to try to sign Edison Flores or maybe trade him to another team. They're not gonna get rid of him unless they decide to buy his contract out. And then the last thing for DC moving forward is, I talk about Lasada throughout the year of how, as entertaining his soccer is, there has to be a point where he needs to be more flexible with his tactics. And there's also times where I compare Hernan Lasada like Mateus Almeida. One of the thing that was kind of frustrates me with Almeida, at least in the first couple of years when I seeing him with the Quakes, is that I like the man marking system, but there tends to be no flexibility where he just live and die by it. And even when the worst time comes, he just doesn't change it, and it can be a very frustrating thing. And this goes same with Hernan Lasada, and I'm pretty sure DC fans are also kind of frustrated too of the fact that yes, we play some entertaining soccer, but we also don't want to give up like 5 or 6 goals every single game, and that at times that has happened to this team. So again, with Lasada, I think he'll probably be more understandable to when it's the right time to really start to go all out on attack, and when it's time to kind of back off a little bit. Because if you don't have like a back off switch, then you are going to really run the team to the ground. Which I think that also maybe kind of explained the injury crisis that they had. Well, actually, not the injury crisis, but also the numerous injuries that they had throughout the season. It just kind of feels like, with Lasada and his system being very high energy, it can really run down a squad throughout a 34 game season. And especially how last year the schedule was just so condensed, it was not a big surprise that players simply are just kind of run to the ground. And that's, I think, something that maybe Lasada needs to think about. I mean, the good news about next season is that at least next season it's not going to be as condensed. And I mentioned before that unless if this COVID outbreak doesn't get any better, every game for next season, there's going to be no situation where there's going to be like back-to-back free games in 7 days that each team will have to face. And again, that's all subject to change because of the whole Omicron situation, and how, you know, there's definitely that fear with how it's really causing havoc in terms of the other leagues that is having their regular season. You know, there's no guarantee the fact that the season could start on time, even though MLS officially announced that. But, you know, at least next season, the season is going to hopefully be a little bit more widespread. So maybe Lasada might not have to worry about that. But like I said, you know, besides the fact that he's running his team to the ground, there's also the fact that, you know, when you're just straight on losing, and or the fact that when teams start to figure you out, you need to find ways to try to change it up and trying to maybe make some adjustment. And that's also kind of where I go back to the Almeida kind of comparison of why I got kind of frustrated with Almeida being very naive with his tactics and just kind of stick with it, even though teams were starting to figure it out. And we'll see whether or not if Lasada doesn't become like Almeida, being very naive and just kind of stick and die with it, even though when teams are starting to figure his tactics out. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of this video, and if you're a DC fan, let me know what went right, what went wrong, and most importantly, moving forward, how is this team going to look heading into next season. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. And oh, one more thing, now that I've done all the teams that being eliminated from the playoffs in the regular season and get to talk about teams that got eliminated during the playoffs, what I'll probably do in terms of the order is talk about teams first eliminating in the first round, and then the second round, and then so forth until we get to talk about the moving forward series of the defending MLS Cup champion NYCFC in the last episode of the moving forward series. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video again. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.